What do you think about compassion? I need a drink. My voice is it's early, okay? Oh. Take two. So what do you think about compassion? It's a weird time right now because here in the States, at least, you have, like, politically, we've become so extreme, you know? I feel like anytime somebody brings up compassion for a particular group of people or a particular situation, you have another group of people who are saying that those people who are speaking about compassion are being too soft, that they're being imprudent, that they are just being like bleeding hearts, that they're snowflakes or whatnot, that they're woke. You know, anytime someone wants to show somebody some level of understanding or mercy, they're fueled by compassion. They want to do something. Now, are there times when out of our bleeding hearts, out of some people's bleeding hearts, that they might do something that is illogical? Maybe. I'm willing to go that far with some people. But that's not my point, though. My point is it's so weird how anytime these days, if there's something that happens in public where people want to show some compassion, that there's a side of the country politically that will be against compassion. It's weird. Ironically, that side typically they call themselves the God-fearing side. Now, I'm not trying to make this political. It might be going in that direction. I'm not trying to. I'm just speaking truth. Like, that side typically sees themselves as the God-fearing side. And I see compassion as a God thing. That's just me. I did look up the definition of compassion. I Googled it. And the Google definition is, I have a notes here, sympathetic pity for the sufferings and misfortunes of others. You can look it up yourself. How can that be bad? To have sympathetic pity for someone else's sufferings. You know? Doesn't make any sense to me. I will add to the definition of compassion. I look at compassion like when you are stopped. Like when you're going along your life and something happens and someone's suffering to a degree that just stops you. All right? And we see a lot of mass shootings these days. And there's even more than we know, right? There's just the mass shootings that become national news. But it stops us. Like when you see it on social media or you see it on TV or whatever, it stops you in your tracks. And you're like, oh man, this horrible thing that has happened. Now, sometimes we'll say, oh, this horrible thing that's happened, and we'll jump right into political mode, political agenda mode, and we'll miss out on that compassion, right? The compassion is trying to stop you to do something that's godly. But we'll miss out on it and just go either side of the political aisle you're on, kind of go into that agenda, right? But it stops you. That's the point. And even more sometimes, if it stops you and there's something that you can do about it, I would say that that's a part of compassion as well. You are compelled to move, to act. I don't see compassion as a weak thing at all. Compassion should compel one to act if they can act, if there's something that they can do. And we see in the Bible that Jesus is moved to compassion a bunch of times, where it's spelled out for us that he's moved to compassion. And other times where we just kind of see it. We see the compassion there. I've got some cases here. This is Matthew 14, verse 14. And it says, when Jesus landed, he saw a large crowd. He had compassion on them and healed their sick. So Jesus, he gets to the place he's trying to go to, or maybe even in his process to get there, right? This wasn't part of the plan. Like he landed, and he's on his way to do something. He has he has an agenda, right? But he stopped. He sees all these sick people in the crowd, and he's moved by compassion to do something. To heal the sick. We see another example here is Matthew 15, verse 32 through 38. I'm going to find it here. Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion on these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. I do not want to send them away hungry, or they may collapse on the way. His disciples answered, where could we get enough bread in this remote place to feed such a crowd? Jesus says, Jesus says, how many loaves do you have? The disciples replied, 7. The disciples replied, 7, and a few small fish. He told the crowd, sit down on the ground. Then he took the 7 loaves that the disciples had and a little bit of fish that they had, and he broke it and gave thanks and gave them to the disciples, and they turned and gave it to the people. They all ate and were satisfied. They all ate, all of them, and were satisfied. Afterwards, the disciples picked up the 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was 4,000, besides women and children. After Jesus had sent the crowd away, he got to the boat and went to the vicinity of Magadan. A lot there, all right? But we know that story where Jesus feeds all these people. Didn't have a lot, but still was able to feed over 4,000 people, well over 4,000 people. So there are times, remember I talked about being compassionate sometimes moves us to be illogical. But that even then could still be a God thing, right? Jesus and the disciples did not have the resources, but they saw the need and they were moved by compassion. Jesus was, at least. I think the disciples probably went with them, right, in that compassion. And they ended up feeding everybody. Everybody ate. I could bring up a woman caught in adultery, where Jesus was currently teaching, and he was interrupted in his teaching by this whole plot by the Pharisees, bringing the woman caught in adultery in. We know this story as well. Many of us, I'm assuming you know it, but look it up if you don't know it. And this woman caught in adultery is brought to him, and he has compassion on her because they were about to stone her in efforts to trap Jesus. But he had compassion. There are times in the Bible where Jesus wept. There's actually 2 times I'm thinking of, but there's a handful of times where the Bible shows Jesus crying, or Jesus gets emotional, right? And 2 times in particular I'm thinking of when he mourns over Jerusalem because they missed him. He's the Messiah and they missed it. So he mourns over that. And then he mourns for Lazarus. Not because his friend is dead, because he knows he's about to raise him from the dead, right? But because death has had its way so thoroughly there, and the people lost their belief in him. And so it made him weep. Moved by compassion. Now in these cases, he was moved by compassion to just be like, Jerusalem, you missed it. Or moved by compassion to, like, why don't these people believe? After everything I've done and said, how do they still not believe? How do they still not get that I am the life? I am the resurrection. And move with compassion to act. We all have our routine in life. Yeah, all of us. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's things that God's put in our hearts, and we serve, hopefully, faithfully every day. And but there are times when sufferings will arise, misfortunes of other people will arise, and God will move our hearts to do something. Compassion will stir up. That kind of breaks our routine, or slows our routine down. There's other times when this suffering or this misfortune happens, where we are moved to change our routine. Not just take a break from it and act in compassion, but to actually change our whole routine, motivated by compassion. So I would challenge all of us, my hope, my prayer, as we live out our lives in worship to God with our routines, that when compassion arises, either face to face or when we see something on social media or whenever, that we let compassion in, right? Let's not go so quickly, immediately to our agenda, to our politics. Let's not go so quickly, so selfishly back to our routine. Let's stop. Let that compassion stir. Let it move us to action. Amen? Amen.